film critic, host of Pop Life, Richard Crouse in Toronto. Richard, good to see you. Reaction to the news?
This is such sad news. It just seems like the other day or last week that I was reading interviews with him where he was talking about his treatment and how he was hopeful. And I think that's one of the great things that he gave back to people who may also be dealing with pancreatic cancer or any kind of cancer. It was the idea that there was hope around the corner. And I was very hopeful that I wouldn't be standing here and talking to you this soon about the life and career of Alex.
Yeah, your read as well, Richard, on someone who follows pop culture so closely, the impact that he had.
Well, Alex Trebek was one of those rare broadcasters who just did one thing. He appeared as himself on several television shows, as we just heard, but he was a host. He was someone who wasn't a news anchor. He wasn't, a singer. He didn't do movies. He was the host of a show, and one of the best at it. He kept his personality out of it, by and large. He asked probably more questions to more people than almost anybody else on television ever has. And I think that his legacy will be now a mixed one. I think that we will think of him for his years as a host on Jeopardy. I think that we'll think of him as a philanthropist who gave away a lot of money. We'll also think of him as someone who battled bravely and publicly with cancer and really helped, I think, a lot of people by being so honest about the stages of grief that he went through, about the hopefulness that he had. I think those are really important messages for anyone who might be feeling the same way that he was.
And also, Richard, as an ambassador for Canada.
Absolutely. From Sudbury, Ontario, to one of the longest-running television shows in the world, he was someone who was always proudly Canadian. He came back here and did charity events when he could. He's lived in the U.S. for a very long time, but he never gave up his Canadianness. And he talked about it frequently on Jeopardy.
Yeah, and you said something that I think is so true. The notion that he was very open and transparent about his battle with pancreatic cancer, whereas others may have shied away from it. He leaned forward, leaned into it, Richard, and talked openly about it too. So there's sort of this remarkable willingness to just be honest with people about something very serious that he was facing.
I think so. And it's interesting that before all of that, we may not have known that much about Alex Trebek. He was someone who was a host on television, a fixture in many people's homes, but he never appeared in the gossip columns. We didn't really hear anything much about his private life, so that when he came forward with this pancreatic cancer diagnosis, it really, because there had been no admissions of anything else in his private life up until then. And I think people loved him, and I think that when he came out with this diagnosis, it really, really got people's attention, and people cared, and I think that he knew that. We saw that in the clip that you just played. One of the answers cost the contestant, I think, $19,500. It said, "We love you, Alex." And I think a lot of people felt that way, and possibly even more so that he was so forthright in his messaging about the things that he was going through.
CTV's Richard Crouse, film critic and host of Pop Life. Thank you, Richard, for this.
Thank you very much.
All right, as we continue our coverage of this breaking news, Alex Trebek dying at the age of 80 of pancreatic cancer. Let's bring in TV critic Bill Brioux, who's joining me on the line. Bill, good to have you part of the conversation here. Your reaction?
Well, it's a sadness, obviously, first of all. We all love Alex Trebek. The guy was there for so long. It's funny, I was just listening to a podcast yesterday with Martin Short, who talked about his early days when he was starting out in show business, and he had a CBC show before SCTV, short-lived show, but he knew he had kind of made it because the guy who was the announcer for the show was Alex Trebek. And I think we forget. He was the Reach for the Top host. He did a lot of Canadian television for CBC primarily way back in the day, and of course, we think of him now after all of those years on Jeopardy.
Yeah, what do you think about his impact culturally?
I just think we were so damn proud of the guy. It's like we were saying earlier, the idea that he was from Sudbury, Ontario, and he just was so impressive on the longest-running game show that there is. And I remember going to see him. There would be these odd charity hockey games in Toronto where you would get all-stars playing ex-NHLers. This is 25 years ago. And there was Trebek on the ice, you know, playing pretty good, playing with Alan Thicke and guys like that. And I think he just loved his Canadian roots. He always made that clear all of those years they lived in the United States.
Interesting, too, to think about his career primarily, of course, as a game show host, that he would have this sort of, cultural impact, Bill.
Oh, absolutely. You know, every American knew where Alex Trebek was from. And that went true for all of those years on Jeopardy. He was very proud of his association with Canada. And I had the great good fortune to interview him a few times over the years. The surprising thing was how playful he was in person. He was always goofing you, and it wasn't the guy just asking those straight questions. He was so professional on that show. But you talked to him one-on-one, and he really was a fun guy. He just wanted to have a good time.
Yeah, also, and I asked this to Richard, so I want to get your read as well, the remarkable transparency about the battle against pancreatic cancer and being, very honest, Bill, that he knew, surviving a second year of pancreatic cancer, the odds were extremely slim.
Yeah, I mean, this is a terrible disease. I remember many years ago interviewing Michael Landon, and then he found out he had pancreatic cancer and died 3 months later. I mean, it generally that was how fast it took hold. And Trebek living another 2 years past this diagnosis, through into his 80s, and literally dying with his boots on. You knew that the guy was going to go that way, that he wasn't going to just quietly retire and spend a few years. No, he was going to go as long as he could. And it's a very, very sad day if you're a Jeopardy fan to think that he's not going to be the guy asking the questions.
What do you think his legacy is, Bill?
Just how to do it right as a broadcaster, how to be one of those guys, those golden voices, those presences that makes you watch a show all those years and really have, with his conviction, a lot of trust in what he said and did. Obviously, it's as a broadcaster. That's his legacy.
Bill Brioux, TV critic. Thank you for this, Bill. Appreciate you coming on and giving us your take on Alex Trebek and his legacy.
My pleasure.
All right, if you are just joining us, Alex Trebek has died at the age of 80 after a battle with pancreatic cancer, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He announced the diagnosis back in March of 2019, and there were some positive developments, even though, as we know, pancreatic cancer is very, very deadly. He'd been undergoing chemotherapy, in fact, while continuing to host Jeopardy for about a year and a half.